This is absolutely insane. A year ago, nobody could have even imagined this scenario playing out. Check out this headline from Yahoo Finance. Ripple can now raise funds via institutions. And you're not going to believe what this story is actually about. The SEC, yes, the same SEC that's been trying to destroy Ripple for years, just filed a waiver that actually helps Ripple. I mean, what parallel universe did we just slip into? Remember Ripple's cross appeal that just got dropped yesterday in that joint filing with the SEC? That whole thing was about those institutional XRP sales that Judge Torres ruled were unregistered securities transactions, basically calling them illegal. So Ripple was gearing up to fight that ruling, right? They were going to try to get that whole institutional sales or securities thing overturned. But now we're living in this bizarro world where the SEC is actually doing Ripple favors with waivers. A year ago, if someone told you, hey, the SEC is going to help Ripple raise institutional funds, you would have checked them into a mental health facility, but here we are. So the huge news yesterday, Ripple and the SEC basically shook hands and said, let's drop all these appeals. But here's where it gets absolutely crazy. And I mean literally the next day. The SEC didn't just walk away saying, okay, we're done fighting. No, they're actually going out of their way to help Ripple now, like actively helping them. That's how completely over this whole crypto war is. They didn't even have to do this. Actually, there's a former SEC lawyer out there saying what they're doing might actually be illegal, helping Ripple like this. I'm not making this up. This whole thing is pretty insane, honestly. But if you're holding Ripple right now, man, you've got to be on top of the world. But hold up. Before we dive deeper, I need to be totally upfront with you. I don't have any financial background whatsoever. I'm definitely not giving you financial advice, and please don't go buying or selling anything just because of what I'm saying here. So here's what happened according to this report. Just one day after the whole SEC versus Ripple drama finally wrapped up, the securities regulator pulled another shocker on August 8th. They actually waived the disqualification that Ripple had been stuck with because of that injunction. And that injunction I'm talking about, that's exactly what I was getting at a minute ago. Basically, this injunction was blocking Ripple from doing those illegal securities deals, those institutional XRP sales. But here's the kicker. Now, Ripple can actually go out and raise money from institutions again, which is something the court's final decision back in August 2024 specifically said they couldn't do. Let me break this whole thing down for you. Back in December 2020, the SEC came after Ripple hard, suing them for supposedly raising over $1.3 billion by selling what they claimed were unregistered XRP securities. But Ripple fought back saying, hold on, XRP isn't a security, it's just digital currency. Fast forward to July 2023, and Judge Torres made this split decision that honestly was pretty interesting. She said when Ripple sold XRP through their programmatic sales to regular retail folks like you and me, that wasn't breaking securities laws. But when they sold XRP directly to big institutional clients, yeah, that crossed the line into securities violations. Then in August 2024, Judge Torres dropped the final hammer, slapping Ripple with a penalty of more than $125 million and basically telling them, don't do this again. And of course, I've got to pause here because now the SEC and Ripple have apparently become best buddies. They're probably building bunk beds together and bonding over their shared love of velociraptors. Bonus points if you can guess what movie I'm referencing without cheating with Google or AI. But here's the thing. Before all this went down, Ripple and the SEC had actually gotten together and worked out a deal to slash Ripple's fine. What did they bring it down to? I think they agreed on something like $50 million instead of that hefty $125 million, if I'm remembering right. Plus, they wanted to ditch that injunction entirely, which would have made Ripple's life so much easier. But Judge Torres, she was absolutely not having any of it. She basically said, nope, not happening. So Ripple was like, well, okay, then we'll just drop our appeal and call it a day. So Both sides dropped their appeals and officially wrapped this whole thing up on August 7th. But here's the catch. That injunction was still sitting there like a roadblock, stopping Ripple from raising money through institutional XRP sales. And because of that injunction, Ripple automatically got slapped with this disqualification under Rule 506D of the Securities Act. What does that mean? Basically, it cuts companies off from using certain exemptions to raise capital without having to go through the whole SEC registration nightmare. But now, and this is where it gets really juicy, the SEC just threw Ripple a lifeline by granting them a waiver from that Rule 506D disqualification. So what can Ripple do now? They can go out there and raise capital from accredited investors without SEC registration by using the Regulation D exemption. That's absolutely huge for them. So I caught wind of this news Friday afternoon through John Deaton's crypto law group, and here's what John himself had to say about it. Basically, Ripple's back in business. They can keep fundraising in private markets just like before. You could honestly say it's like nothing ever happened, as if that whole lawsuit and the $125 million fine was just a bad dream. And that's exactly what makes this so messed up. We're talking about 5 years of absolute chaos, money thrown down the drain, and regular XRP holders getting completely screwed over. But now, it's like none of that matters. The whole thing just disappeared. Can you believe we all had to suffer through that nightmare, watching so many people get hurt just for the SEC to turn around and go, oh, wait, never mind, you're totally fine. It's completely bonkers when you think about it. Here's what XRP community member and attorney Fred Rispoli posted, and honestly, the guy nailed it. He said, look, I was totally off about Judge Torres changing the injunction, but I kept saying it didn't really matter anyway. A fresh, fair, and smarter SEC could just give Ripple whatever they needed. And you know what? Nobody could ever give him a good reason why the SEC couldn't do exactly that. Now he's feeling pretty vindicated, and rightfully so. The guy was spot on. The SEC didn't just could do it, they actually went ahead and did it. They made it happen, plain and simple. Here's what XRP community member and attorney Bill Morgan had to say, and he's pretty pumped about it. He said, another win for Ripple right here. The SEC just issued an order that wipes out that bad actor label Ripple got stuck with from the permanent injunction. Since Judge Torres wouldn't just toss the whole injunction, this is basically the next best thing, and it's going to make fundraising way easier for them. So now Ripple's free to do those exempt securities offerings again, which is huge. But here's the kicker. This could also help them with that national bank charter they've been going after. And man, that's a big deal. The whole thing's just another win for the XRP ecosystem. I mean, you can debate how much it helps, but at the very least, and I'm talking bare minimum here, this is all good news that trickles down to benefit us somehow. Then we got this take from former SEC attorney Mark Fagel, and someone asked him about the whole waiver situation. His response? The legalities are pretty murky here. He basically said what the SEC is doing is totally uncharted territory for crypto, maybe even questionable legally. But then he throws in this zinger. Even if it's completely illegal, who's going to complain? Unless XRP investors end up losing their shirts and start asking why the SEC didn't protect them. Yeah, right. Like XRP holders are going to be begging the SEC for help anytime soon. That's definitely not happening. Look, XRP's clearly been one of the early winners in crypto. Sure, it could have some brutal corrections. I actually think we're going to see an XRP bubble form and eventually burst. But overall, I'm betting it follows that same amazing upward trend we've seen with Bitcoin over the years, just with those wild swings along the way. So Mark can say whatever he wants about it, but that's how I see it playing out. I totally agree. XRP investors aren't going to be crying about losses this market cycle. I mean, sure, some newbies might jump in at the absolute peak like they always do, but the XRP community members who've been grinding it out for years, no way they're running to the SEC for help. That's just not going to happen. Then this XRP community member, Sherry, throws out an interesting question. Wait, couldn't regular investors just sue Ripple directly because of all this? Mark Fagel's response was pretty solid, though. He said, I don't think they'd even have the legal standing to do that. How exactly are they getting hurt by Ripple selling to other people? Plus, he pointed out that Ripple's got a pretty bulletproof defense now. they can just wave around that SEC waiver and say, hey, the SEC said we're good. Even if that waiver itself is legally sketchy, it's still a hell of a shield for Ripple to hide behind. Yeah, Ripple's basically bulletproof at this point, no matter how you look at it. But then Mark gets into the really juicy stuff. He dug into the actual language of that waiver order and was like, holy crap, this is even more lawless than I initially thought. Apparently, the SEC straight up admits they wanted to undo that injunction. You know, the same one the district court specifically said absolutely not to. It's basically the SEC giving the court a giant middle finger. But Mark's attitude is pretty much whatever. What's anyone going to do about it anyway? And honestly, that's exactly what this boils down to. Business as usual, just like Attorney Deaton was saying earlier. You gotta love seeing this play out though, right? It's absolutely beautiful to watch. Oh,